A couple years back, my boyfriend and I were driving in the country back roads of central Illinois. It was about 9 p.m., cold and rainy, mid-October, large wooded areas all around. We were in mid-conversation when we both cut off at the same time, and we were overcome with dread. To the right of the road was a 6 or 7 foot tall, pale humanoid. Its arms were disproportionately long and thin. It didn't have any discernible facial features. It peered out from behind the trees and looked directly at us. We were both silent for about 30 seconds, and I finally said, did you see? And my boyfriend says, "Thank God you said something. I thought I was crazy." A few days later, our two friends were hanging out in their car at one of the local park areas, surrounded by woods and cornfields. The fields were recently harvested, so you could see all the way to the tree line. They said they saw something pale and incredibly thin and humanoid across the field. It ran kind of like a dog, and it disappeared into the woods within seconds. At first, I thought it might be something different because I was thinking what I saw was more humanoid. Then, I discovered that thousands of people have reported seeing humanoid, pale, naked, lanky things that move like dogs. There's apparently particularly a lot of sightings in Illinois, so that part adds up as well. Lots of reports from the 50s and 60s of pale humanoids as well. It really makes me wonder. Anyway, I'm now convinced that there's an undiscovered humanoid living in America. We haven't proved they exist because they're so fast and silent. They also hide in abandoned buildings, caves, and mines. Back in the early 1990s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of this incident, and I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a rural area in southeastern Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean that it was a series of networked dirt roads to get out to their house. The closest neighbors besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile up the road, were over a mile and a half away. The closest town was a 10-mile trip. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived in this house since my mother was a child, and had both grown up just a ways down the road. Anyway, there was a general store, roughly 3 to 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. This was your typical country general store, ran by an old lady and her husband, and its only customers really only consisted of the people who lived out there in bumfuck Egypt. One day, my grandmother asked me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get her some milk, eggs, and a few other miscellaneous items, and I told her I would. She gave me some money, and I headed on my way. It was fairly early in the day, and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming about. Things can get mighty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people who have lived primarily in cities or towns have ever experienced. Me, being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to a small wooden bridge you have to cross, and messed around at the creek catching crawdads and such. And I kinda just messed around the whole way to the store. By the time I left the store, I realized it was quickly approaching dark. This was fall, and darkness set upon the land pretty early in the day. I didn't want to be walking those lonely, secluded roads through the woods, alone in the dark, so I hurried as fast as I could, running and sprinting as much as possible. But it wasn't enough. By the time I had made it back to the bottom of the hill near the bridge, it was almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow, brought about by a very bright, nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill, the road was perfectly straight and flat, with woods on the left side and a large field on the right. About a half-mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of the lights at their house, and I feel a sense of relief because I was kind of freaking out a little bit, but knowing I was so close and could see the house offered a little bit of comfort. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes had adjusted to the darkness rather well at this point. As I walked up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned to look, and I saw nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch. A black shadowy shape slowly moves toward me. At first, I thought it was a dog, but then I realized it was much too large to be a dog. And then I realized it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs. It was crawling, like a person would. I stared for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing. And then a jolt of fear shot through me as it dawned on me that whatever this thing was, it had been trying to sneak up on me. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on 2 legs, like a person. It had the shape of a human, long arms, legs, and was proportioned as such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height, and was completely covered in a black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face was dark in color, but I can't recall seeing much in the way of features due to it being night. It was no bear for certain, or any other kind of animal I had ever seen for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as my legs could take me toward my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing, guttural growling kind of sound behind me, and I heard this thing's footsteps running behind me on the gravel as it gave chase. I didn't turn around, and was certain that it would grab me at any moment. I then heard it crash off into the woods, and let out an earth-shattering and ungodly scream, unlike anything I'd ever heard before or since. I'm positive this thing could have easily caught me had it wanted to, but for some reason, it let me go. By the time I reached my grandparents', my heart felt as if it would explode from the combination of the adrenaline rush I had from being scared beyond any type of fear I'd ever felt before or since, and full-on sprinting as hard and fast as possible for about a straight half-mile. I flew into the house, and in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what had just happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something had scared me, and acted rather weird about the whole thing. She tried to convince me it was just a dog or some other animal. The next morning, I woke up and found my grandpa sitting outside, whittling wood underneath the shade tree in the front yard, as he often liked to do. I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He was a very rational man, down to earth, and had grown up and hunted that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in those woods, what noise they made, where to find them, how to catch them, etc. I had only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into those woods with him since a pretty young age on walks and such. He had passed a lot of his knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what had happened to me the night before, and told him that I knew what I saw. It wasn't my overactive imagination, I wasn't making it up, and it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't just some dumb 13-year-old kid, and he knew that I knew the things he had taught me. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it before too. There's things out in them woods that people don't understand, and that a person ought not go fooling with." I remember those words clearly to this day, because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time, it made me realize whatever I'd seen was very real in existence, and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs, and at the bottom of those cliffs is a cave. He told me that the cave is where the creature lived. He had once stumbled upon it a long time ago when he was hunting. He said he was standing on top of the cliff looking at it, and when a creature fitting the same description emerged and began screaming wildly at him and throwing rocks. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing gave chase to him. But my grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get to him, this thing had to go around a pretty good distance and then up, which he said it quickly began to do, so we hightailed it out of there in a hurry. He said the whole way back home, he felt as if he were being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him, and he was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turned and looked back at the woods from where he came, and saw it peeking out at him from behind a tree. Later that night, he said that he and my grandmother awoke in the early morning hours to large rocks being thrown at the house, and ungodly howling noises from outside, and this thing trying to get into the house. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep, garbled voice, but it didn't sound like a language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, the thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling, so my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it out the front door a few times into the darkness in the direction of the howling, and said he heard it run back into the woods. He didn't know if he did it or not. He said that was the last he'd ever seen or heard from it, but over the years, an occasional farmer's cow would be mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or someone would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He also said it scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely has refused to ever talk about it, or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her what happened to me. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, and you can believe it or not. It makes no difference to me. I know what I saw, and my grandpa knew what he saw, and neither of us have ever felt the need to convince anyone else of it. In fact, until today, I have never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa, and he passed away roughly 10 years ago. If anyone has ever driven in Alabama, then you know it can be a creepy state to drive through. I'm not sure where to start. I've had a few experiences with the paranormal, which I plan to post here as I find the time, but this is my only cryptid experience. I'm not sure what we witnessed, but we got a good look at it in broad daylight. This sighting happened just before noon. My girlfriend and I had some time off work, so we decided on a much needed getaway for a long weekend. This was early 2019, late January or early February, so it was pretty darn cold. That being said, if you know anything about the southern USA, it doesn't get that cold. This was just one of those rare days when it was 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just trying to compile all the events surrounding the sighting, so bear with me here. We were on a highway in a swampy area. I have no idea the exact location, but I can say it was southern Alabama and close to Mississippi. There were lots of bridges. I wish we could have gotten pics, but the car was moving around 60 miles per hour when it happened. My girlfriend cries out for me to look, and I turn my head to get a glimpse of a grotesque-looking creature. This thing was hunched down on all fours, possibly eating something. This all happened so fast, but I slow down and get a better look. All of a sudden, the thing stands on two legs and has a humanoid figure, all except the head. The head was goat-like, but it had the body of a man. There were horns, and overall, the head resembled that of a light-colored goat. The creature started back toward the woods, and we continued with our trip, but we couldn't stop talking about what we had just witnessed. I cannot be 100% sure of what we saw. This all happened so fast. My girlfriend swears it was a man with a goat head, and I'm certain that I saw the same thing. If anyone has any insight into cryptids of this type, or a similar sighting, I'd be glad to hear. I've spent 2/3 of my life trying to debunk this one, or at least come up with a reasonable explanation. When I was in 5th grade, I rode the bus with a girl who was a grade or two below me. We lived on opposite sides of a rather large apartment complex, but could still walk to each other's houses. Let's call her Mika. Mika was born in Romania and had moved here a few years prior to me meeting her. She had heterochromia. She had brown eyes, but half of one of her irises was blue. This is relevant later. Her family was off. I went over to her apartment a few times to hang out with her and remembered seeing a lot of unusual decor in her home. Lots of candles, a few altars, and a lot of taxidermy. Her mother would get very upset anytime she brought friends over, so typically she would sneak myself and a few of our other friends in anytime her mom was out shopping. My mom was pregnant at the time and often felt sick, so I never brought friends over unless she was running errands or at the doctor's. She had never met Mika. A lot of the other kids were scared of her or felt uneasy around her. None of our mutual friends could explain why. I did too at times for some unknown reason, but as a fellow outcast, we stuck by each other's sides. After a few months of knowing each other, she started telling me that her family followed a belief system similar to paganism. I forget exactly what she called their religion. It wasn't Wicca or pagan or any other common, for lack of a better word, spiritual belief system. Mika started claiming that she had special powers. I immediately called bullshit and told her to prove it. She responded by telling me she would shapeshift into a cat and visit me later that evening. My family and I lived on the 3rd floor of our apartment building. There were no fire escapes, balconies, or anything like that. We barely had window ledges. As a side note, I loved cute stuff. Hello Kitty, Care Bears, My Little Pony, all that. My best friend at the time was very into fashion and loved to act like a high schooler. The few times she saw me in cartoon PJs, she'd make jokes. So, I stopped wearing anything that looked like that to school or sleepovers, almost a full year prior to me meeting Mika. I went to bed at my normal bedtime of 9:30, wearing some Care Bear pajamas that my mom had bought me a week prior. Nobody had seen me in them aside from my parents. Around 3 a.m. that night, I woke up to what sounded like scratching at my window. I jumped out of bed, looked out my window, and saw a black cat staring directly at me. The cat was sitting on the very thin window ledge and raised its paw at me as if it were waving. Freaked out, I told myself I was dreaming and went back to bed. That morning, while my mom was cooking breakfast, she asked me if I'd heard anything weird outside the night before. I asked her what she meant. I saw the weirdest thing last night. I heard scratching at my window. I got up to see what it was and saw a black cat on the window ledge. It looked like she was trying to open my window. I sat there in silence, unsure of what to say. My mom continued. I was afraid it was going to fall, so I brought it inside, carried it downstairs, and put it outside. You should have seen its eyes. It had one eye that was half blue. I've never seen a cat like that before. I felt sick. I couldn't finish my breakfast. Not wanting to approach Mika after this, I stood off to the side, away from all the other kids, until she walked up to me. Hey Gloomy Bear, why didn't you let me in last night? I was stunned. I could have died. At least your mom was nice enough to take me downstairs. I stopped hanging around with Mika after that. Our building caught on fire a few weeks after this happened, and we ended up moving away. I haven't seen or heard from her since. To this day, my mom still remembers the cat. She'll mention it in passing every few years, and make comments about how weird it was, and that the cat could have gotten up on that ledge. For the last 20 years, I've been racking my brain looking for an explanation. If anyone has one, I'd love to hear it. I hike a lot, and this past winter, I saw footprints I couldn't explain. I live in Arizona, not far from the Navajo reservation. I am Navajo. In the middle of nowhere, there are ruins of an abandoned house. There's no roof, just adobe walls, a dried up old well, and a dilapidated travel trailer. Somebody broke into the travel trailer long ago, and pack rats built nests inside the trailer. I've never been inside the trailer because I avoid mouse droppings due to hantavirus fears. I use the abandoned house and travel trailer as landmarks in my hikes. So this past winter, I went on a hike. At the abandoned homestead, I saw footprints of a small child. No adults and nothing else. The footprints were 5 inches long and 3 inches wide, and they looked like the soles of sneakers or something a child would wear. I also saw evidence that the child dug around inside the travel trailer, taking out things from within. There was a hodgepodge of household items lined up neatly in a row: steel skillet, hammer, roofing nails, old Coleman fuel containers, old-fashioned glass bottles, etc. Wondering if I was seeing the tracks of a runaway or lost child, I decided to track the footprints. The tracks led away from the homestead, across the plains, and up the side of a mesa. 3 miles away, the tracks intersected a dirt road. At the dirt road, I found tire tracks from a car. The car was parked parallel to the dirt road. The child's footprints walked to the driver's side of the car and got in. The car tracks then did a 3-point turn and headed back in the opposite direction. Confused about the tracks, I visited my elder. I relayed my story, and my elder offered an explanation. He told me that I tracked a skinwalker. He also told me they have the ability to make their bodies and footprints small. He told me a story of how the magic works. He said the skinwalker was probably looking for something of value inside the ruins. I don't know if this is the correct sub to post this, but I just remembered this from last night and wanted to get it off my chest. I was just chilling in my room playing some games late at night. I was playing with my headphones on, but I heard a faint sound, like someone walking around outside. So I take off my headphones and slowly open the curtains, and I didn't see anything. I assumed it was maybe a raccoon, since there were many of them where I live. I went back to my game, and not even a minute later, I hear the sound again. I didn't bother to look up because I thought it was an animal or something. I kept playing my video game, and eventually, I noticed that the crunching sound had been going on for definitely more than a few minutes. I felt confused and scared. I was afraid to look outside. I thought maybe it was someone that was scouting my house to break in. I was scared shitless and felt sick. The sounds outside were still going on as I mustered the courage to look through the curtains. I slowly opened them some more and the sound stopped. When I looked out into the road that was in front of my house, there was a fucking terrifying creature. It was at least 9 feet tall. It was grotesque and inhuman looking. I still feel sick and scared writing this. I don't know if I was hallucinating, but I fucking hope I was. My boyfriend and I are travelers and live in our van. I am from upstate New York and he's from Manhattan. I've been living like this for over 5 years now and have seen a lot. One of the best parts about this lifestyle is the people you get to meet from all walks of life all over the world. Needless to say, we have had a lot of exposure to different people, and we aren't easily scared by strange behavior or differences. A lot of times, we will camp in national forests, but there are also plenty of nights we spend in Walmart parking lots and Home Depots, and anywhere we can find with overnight street parking. The latter has brought us to some sketchy areas, where other homeless people camp in bum camps and whatnot. And obviously hardcore drug use in some of these areas is a real thing. With that being said, a few weeks ago, we were kicking it in Denver and went downtown to the Rhino District, off of Larimar, I believe, and we're looking at the murals and street art and taking pictures and generally just chilling. It was almost midnight, and we ended up in an alley behind an old Catholic church when we saw the feet in blankets of someone sleeping in the doorway. Now, as another person on the street, even though I don't live the exact same lifestyle as people who have to sleep super public like that, I still empathize as much as possible and try to give them respect and privacy. Like, I don't grill them while they're laying there because I can imagine how uncomfortable and demeaning that would be to wake up to. So as we begin to pass this person, I keep in the forefront of my mind not to stare, and I prepare myself that they might be asleep or they might be awake and looking at us, and not to get startled. This person was laying in a maybe 3-foot indent in front of an entrance to an old factory behind this Catholic church. No matter how prepared I try to get myself, and no matter how much exposure I have to other people on the street, I could not help but get a surge of adrenaline and fear when we passed by this lady. As we got closer, I glanced over and she was sitting up, slouched in the corner, looking right at us. To me, she looked like she could have been Native or Hispanic. Her skin was a mix of brown and gray, and she had long, tangled black hair. But what I remember most is her eyes. They were huge and bugged out, and seemed like they were painfully strained, and you could see her lips pull back to show her teeth effortlessly. She had a blank expression on her face the whole time we walked by. I feel like this is a good place to mention that after spending time on the West Coast, you get crazy accustomed to tweakers and general meth antics. You can usually always tell when someone has lost themselves to meth, and it is a special kind of crazy, but crazy all the same. You can feel when someone has lost themselves to this drug, and the decaying and neglect of their bodies is very apparent. With that being said, this woman did not give off druggy vibes. She didn't look ill and frail because of drug use, and she didn't seem to be fueled by drugs. She genuinely looked sick, like terminally ill type sick. The most fucked up part of this is what she said to us as we walked by. Shane was on my left side, my little husky was clipped to me in between us, and the lady was sitting on the ground to my right. And as we passed by, and I noticed she was making eye contact, I gave her a soft, gentle smile and looked down. I don't know what Shane did to her as far as facial expressions and acknowledgement goes, but as we started to pass her, she says in a soft, serious voice with no inflection at all, "What is it called when you don't believe in God anymore?" And Shane quickly responded, "I think that's agnostic." And we just kept walking. As soon as we got out of earshot, I was like, "Shane, what the fuck? Why did that scare me so much?" And he was like, "You're okay. It was just a homeless person. It's no big deal." I had a feeling she was going to scare you though, but it's okay. And we kept walking down the alley. At this point, I let Boppy, my husky, off her clip so she could walk on her own, and she just followed behind us quietly. She never barked throughout the whole ordeal or acted scared at all, and she's losing her eyesight a bit, but I have seen it heighten her other senses, and she knows when things are fucked up or if someone wants to hurt us and will bark and go into defense mode. She went through this whole encounter with nothing. We leave the alley and are in front of these old apartment buildings that remind us of something you'd see in New York or even New Orleans. Totally project looking, almost shotgun houses, and completely out of place for gentrified ass Denver. We saw them as we drove by before this happened, and instantly felt drawn to them because they were so out of place. There was a kid's jungle gym placed on top of a bush in front of a house, which was distinct as fuck, but we didn't mention it until later. And there was a haze of a flashing TV screen, and someone screaming in one of the houses through the open door. And this was all across the street from the old ominous Catholic church. It was just a dark alley, the lady, the creepy church, the foreign houses, the supposed presence of children, and the soft hazy lighting from the streetlight above that was such a mindfuck that it didn't feel like we were in Denver anymore. Or, I hate to be this guy, but like we weren't in 2020 anymore. Later on that night, we got back to the van, and Shane told me that woman actually terrified him, and that he knew I was scared, but had to act like everything was okay for me so I didn't lose my shit. He said it was just as unnatural as I felt, and that he doesn't think we saw a person. When he said that, I flipped out, because that's exactly what I thought too. It was unsettling how we both felt the same thing at the same time, and didn't realize it until later on when we discussed the situation. This happened in Venice, California. So last night, we were sleeping in the van by the dog park near the boardwalk, and Shane was staying up doing some art stuff in the van. The way our van is set up is on the left side we have a big long window, and then the driver's side window uncovered. Shane heard someone's feet shuffling and dragging, and was curious which tweaker was walking by, and looked out the window to see someone passing by. This was about 2 a.m., and he saw a lady wearing a black beach hat resting on top of her head, with really thin balding hair, so much that you could see her scalp underneath. She turned her head to the side and tried to look through the big window, and it felt like she could see through the window, but simultaneously not looking at anything in particular. Her eyes were really deep set and sunken in, and it seemed like she hadn't slept in a while, but she didn't seem to be on any drugs. Her skin was pale white, and she seemed to be in her 70s or so. She was really frail and dressed to go to the beach, which was strange because it was so late at night, dark, and chilly for Venice at nighttime. It felt like she wanted people to think that she was going to the beach. She was talking to herself, but it wasn't audible, and was no human language he's ever heard. It sounded like radio tuning or something, like a strange frequency of radio tuning. She didn't notice him, even though they were a few feet away from each other, and she wasn't angry or anything like that. It just felt like she was trying to deceive him. The craziest part is there's a plastic divider in between the two windows, and when she walked away from the big picture window, Shane could hear her footsteps, but she never passed by the front window. She didn't cross the street or go behind the van or anything. She walked straight, and he never saw her pass the second window. I'm so glad I wasn't awake for this shit, because I would have totally lost it. As soon as I woke up in the middle of the night, and he told me what happened, I instantly got chills. I don't know what to think about this at all, but I would love to hear your theories. Thanks for listening. My uncle had an encounter in the summer, several years back. The only reason I believe him is because his whole life, he's always been a super serious, no bullshit kind of guy. When he told me the story, he sounded genuinely upset about it. He's a long-haul truck driver and was stopped on the side of the highway in a heavily wooded area. This was somewhere several miles in the middle of nowhere, but he said it was closest to Reed City, Missouri. I can't recall what he said he was doing, but he had to fix something before he could take off. Also, he didn't have a trailer at the time. He had just gotten done fixing up his stuff and was about to climb into his vehicle when he saw a deer come towards him from the tree line. He said it looked like it might have been running from something. He assumed it might have been a bear. He was just getting ready to leave when, suddenly, he sees something looking at him through the passenger side window. He described it as having jet black fur and bright yellow eyes, as well as vicious-looking, snarling teeth. It was so close to him that he could see its fur blowing with the slight breeze that was coming through. The window was open, but it didn't seem to notice, as was evident when the creature put its paw up to the window as if to press against it, but pulled back in shock when it realized its paw actually entered the vehicle. My uncle typically carries a gun on him. At this time, he had a heavy revolver. The exact name and caliber is beyond my memory right now. He pointed it at the dog man and pulled the trigger, effectively shooting it in the face. He gunned it, and the truck started moving fast enough for him to be confident that the thing wasn't following him should it have survived the shot. He didn't bother waiting around to find out. He said he still gets disturbed when he thinks back to that event. He described it as giving off this aura of pure evil and ill intent in only the few seconds that he faced it. He has nightmares about this creature to this day, and he refused to tell anyone about it for several years after it happened for fear of people thinking he lost his mind. Another reason I'm able to buy his story is because he's never been interested in the occult, supernatural, the paranormal, cryptids, or anything. He had no idea what to make of this thing he saw, but when he told me the story, I told him to look into the Dogman. When we looked online, he said the artist's depictions of the Dogman perfectly fit what he saw that day. It was Boston, the dead of night after Christmas Day of '84, and I had just turned 4. It was a good year for presents, and one thing I got was a tent bed, a pop-up tent that fit over my mattress. I slept on one side of the house, while my parents and 3 sisters slept on the other, separated by the kitchen and living room. It was a very old house. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise coming from the living room. It sounded like random digital tones. I recognize now like the first 10 seconds of ELO's telephone line. I was clutching my Cabbage Patch Kid doll. My sisters all had one, so my parents got me one, the boy, a Red Sox themed one, and rolled over and can see out of the vents at the top of the tent bed a cascade of tiny shiny diamond shapes. They were floating down around my tent bed, not through the vent, and it didn't scare me or anything. I just thought, hey, look at that, that's pretty interesting. You don't see that every day. Still carrying my Cabbage Patch doll, I unzipped the tent bed and walked to my door because I assumed my sister was going to get an ass whipping because she was up playing with one of the new toys. Specifically, I thought she was playing with a Monkey See Radio Shack calculator she got that made noises. When I got to the threshold, I saw, standing in the kitchen about 5 feet in front of me, a 3-foot tall humanoid blue creature. It looked like it was made of modeling clay. It was holding my mom's ancient copy of The Joy of Cooking. It was open, and it appeared to be reading it. Then, it looked directly at me, and its mouth went round like an O. I assumed in surprise. I immediately noped the fuck out and jumped back into my tent bed, clutching the Cabbage Patch doll tightly. I was completely terrified and just stayed like that until I eventually fell asleep. Nothing happened like that before or since, and I remember it like it was yesterday. This happened about a month ago in Champaign, Illinois. I live in a neighborhood in town, a few blocks away from main city streets, around Madison University, if you're familiar with the area. I was in the front yard doing some yard work. The west side of the yard is lined with tall evergreens, but they are sparse enough to see through to the lot next to me and the house on the other side of the lot. I paused from working and noticed some movement through the trees, an animal running or trotting from the back of the lot to the street. I decided to watch it, just in case it was the dog from the house on the other side of the lot, and it needed to be returned to the owner. When the animal entered the street, my immediate thought was that it was a baby deer. It ran like a deer and was about that size. But then I realized it wasn't a deer. Its body looked more like a dog, like a greyhound or whippet. It really looked like a cross between a deer and dog, but looked like neither. It just didn't look right. It was a solid tan color, no spots or markings, and it had a long slender tail, muzzle or snout, and body. I believe it also had long ears that it held back against its head. It made absolutely no sound as it ran, and only looked straight ahead as it crossed the street into the overgrown backyard of an abandoned house. I only saw it for a few seconds, but I got a pretty good look at it. I know it could have been a dog, but it just didn't move like a dog. My husband thinks it may have been some sort of cryptid. We're tempted to explore the abandoned house to see what we can find out. So I'm going to start by saying, I'm basically a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. Although, I love hearing stories and listening to others' point of view when it comes to that kind of stuff. This is why I'm having such a hard time understanding what happened to me last September. My dad, grandma, grandpa, and I were attending my cousin's wedding in a small rural town just outside of South Haven, Michigan, late last summer. We rented a small house in town, which was located in a very wooded area, just off of a small lake. Something felt extremely off as soon as I got out of the car at our rental property. That's the best way I could describe it. Something felt off, and I was immediately uneasy. But, being the skeptic that I am, I shrugged it off and chalked it up to being tired and anxious. The night we arrived, my dad and I were having a smoke outside and noticed how weird everything sounded. It was about 11 p.m., and there was no one else around. The trees were crackling incredibly loudly, and we were hearing strange animal noises, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Just the type of animal noises you'd hear in rural Michigan. But they just sounded particularly strange to us for some reason that we couldn't distinguish. We said our goodnights and went to bed. The next morning, my dad told me that he went outside for a smoke about 2 a.m. and heard what sounded to him like someone close by banging on metal siding. He said it sounded like it was just next door, but didn't hear anything leading up to or preceding the loud banging, like footsteps or anything. We shrugged and laughed it off. The second night was when I had the experience that I still can't stop thinking about 6 months later. It was around 11 p.m. to maybe midnight, and I was having my last smoke of the night. My grandparents were already asleep, and my dad had just gotten into bed, but was still awake watching TV. I was sitting on the stairs outside with my back to the house, looking straight out into the backyard. I heard someone shout my name in a very abrupt manner, loud and fast. It sounded like they were shouting toward me from the front of the house, like they were standing on the front porch shouting for me, knowing I was in the back. It sounded just like my dad, but it couldn't have been him because I didn't hear the front door open or close or anything. Being a skeptic, I reminded myself to stay calm, and I quickly walked back into the house, and I found my dad sound asleep. There was no way that by the time I got to him, he could have gotten back into bed. I woke him up and asked him if he'd been outside, yelling my name. He looked confused and said of course not. I started to get really freaked out at that point. I tried to go to bed, but I couldn't get that scream out of my head. I was up all night trying to figure out what happened. I was honestly contemplating leaving and getting a hotel room somewhere close by and returning in the morning. Miraculously, I must have fallen asleep sometime around 3. We woke up the next morning, and I was so ready to get the hell out of that town. As soon as we left, the uneasy feeling I had the entire weekend completely disappeared.
One night, when I was 7 or 8, I saw something that I now recognize as evil and not normal. I grew up in a town on the Navajo reservation. We lived in a neighborhood, and our neighbors were from different places within the region. This detail is important because Navajos like to live far from one another and only in the immediate vicinity of their relatives. For good reason. They don't like to live near strangers. So, this particular night, I was told to sleep in my older brother's room. His room had a bed, a box spring and mattress directly on the floor, and a dresser with a TV in the middle of the room. For curtains, he had linen, the see-through stuff that hides nothing, always fully closed. He didn't have posters, pictures, or anything else in his room. For some reason, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned and shut my eyes tightly until I saw neon rings outlining the darkness of my closed-eyed vision. I tried counting imaginary sheep, and still, I couldn't sleep. I don't know what time it was when the dog started barking and running with something. I sat up in bed and looked out the window. Moonlight lit our backyard, and I couldn't see anything. I merely listened to the dogs, who were out of sight. Then, from the house to my left, I heard something run with loud footsteps and dogs in pursuit. Within a split second, the footsteps approached my backyard and into my view. I saw something white run by the window, followed by the dogs. It looked like a hyena with an elongated neck and galloping gait. I also noticed that the neck stood more upright, like the angle of a giraffe's neck. At the time, I didn't know enough to fear what I saw. I didn't tell anybody until decades later. As an adult, I told my parents about what I saw that night, and they told me that back then, we lived next door to a witch, or a skinwalker. I had seen her leaving her home in animal form on that night. I recall that neighbor died within 1 or 2 years of me seeing that hyena.
I may seem out of my mind. I feel like I am. The first night I heard it was the end of the summer of 2019. I was building my own art studio in the back of this old building. One night, I stepped down onto the back deck to clean up. I was staring off into the woods that ran right up next to the steps leading up to my studio. I heard something let loose, this immense, deep howling off in the distance. It had such a blood-curdling effect on the air around me, it gave me goosebumps and raised every hair on my body. And shortly after it went silent, I heard all the dogs in a 1 to 2 mile radius barking, yipping, and howling in the direction of that roar or howl. There's no way it was a wolf or any large cat. I've heard videos and sound bites of wildcats or mountain lions making those demonic type sounds, and that wasn't this. This was a roar of a human-animal mix. I could hear it in his voice. The area of Ohio I'm in isn't a place where you'd see any large cat or let alone hear one. My first thought was, that's the Wendigo coming to get me. And I don't know why that popped in my head like that, and a countless other number of things have been happening more and more, almost like intuition or something in my head. 4 weeks prior to the weirdest shit I've ever experienced, I was approached by a man about commissioning 3 art pieces of something I wasn't familiar with at all. Wendigos. More specifically, a wartime Wendigo, where it's this huge 1,000-foot tall creature, taller than a skyscraper. And it's made out of all of us, body parts sticking out all over it, a face here and there. It was supposed to represent all of our greed and insatiable desire or want for more. Sadly, I didn't have the time to work on these pieces, so I passed. But it started reminding me of my own monster that's been following me my whole life. I made some drawings of a dream night terror I had a week before this man approached me to turn us all into the Wendigo. In my dream, it was a tall, emaciated creature with animal-like legs and human-like arms, crouching in my kitchen like a dog would sit and looking at my cabinets. "What the hell are you doing, dude?" I asked it. "Chill the fuck out. I'm looking for some chips or something. I'm fucking starving. It replied. I sat up quickly and threw the blanket off me. It turned to look at me, and the way it looked was indescribable, but I took in every detail that I could. It had large, black holes where the eyes were supposed to be, and just a jagged slit across the lower side of its face that represented a mouth with no lips, and thousands of rows of jagged teeth curled around its gums, with a long tongue sliding out between them. It let out a gurgled, squelching scream. Then, all of a sudden, black smoky tendrils shot out of where its hair was supposed to be on its head, lingered for a second, and sucked back in toward its body. Then boom, it vanished. I made drawings of it as soon as I woke up and was trying to put the pieces together as to why it was in my kitchen. And at that moment, the hair on my body stood on end, because I had an unanswered email about commissioning some artwork based on this creature. Fast forward to June 2020. Corona has taken over the world, and I'm sure I've lost my mind. I forgot all about it, and I'm hanging out with a friend at 3 o'clock in the morning. After months of not seeing or talking to anyone, it seems, we went to White Castle for a quick bite. She walks out first and hits the bottom step. As I'm walking out, locking the door, I hear something breaking tree limbs, crashing through them. Not fast, but not slow, and definitely noticeable. And it was coming from up high, and gradually getting louder as it neared us, and as it got lower. It reminded me of an orangutan or a gorilla, the way it swung from each branch, and can hear its hands gripping each one, and snapping smaller limbs in its way. It was coming in our direction. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'm crazy, until my friend turned around quick and was looking up high in the trees. She asked me, "Do you hear that?" I turned white and felt the air get heavier from whatever vibes were emanating from this thing. As I came down the stairs, she staring into the trees looking upwards. I glanced and saw branches moving. I yelled at her to get out of there quick, pulling her towards the direction of the car. We turned our backs to the woods when this loud whack landed just behind me, and all the hairs on my body stood straight up. I felt like it had a log or a large thick branch in its hand, and it smacked the ground with it. I stood paralyzed with fear. The air was thicker and different when whatever it was landed directly behind me. I could feel the force of it, and it brought tears to my eyes, and it was the weirdest feeling to have come over me. It felt like it was crushing every inch of my body without even touching me. And to hurt so bad, it brought tears to my eyes and made me shake uncontrollably. And the fear that it made me feel was just too much to bear. Hands down, one of the scariest moments that I've ever encountered. I couldn't shake it. So, we went to White Castle and were both shook to our core, and I'm in disbelief of what we just witnessed. We came back and turned the brights on in our car and let them light up the woods for a good 20 minutes before we felt it was safe to go back inside. The only weapon I had in sight was a golf club. She told me she had seen it, high in the trees, and it looked almost like an owl, but with weird features. Later on, she told me a story about when she was a teenager. She thought she was going to get taken off the back of a motorcycle by a huge owl swooping down toward her. And I told a friend about this a few months later, and somehow remembered whatever these things are, they feed off of fear. I don't know where I remember this from, or why these thoughts randomly popped into my head. It's almost like something else is telling me. This happened about 7 years ago, when I was 16. This story requires a bit of backstory, so bear with me for a sec. My dad's side of the family lives in deep, southeast Texas. I'm talking like 100 people to a town deep. That being said, my cousin lives down there. My cousin grew up learning every single inch of the woods. Every sound, every smell. You get the point. He could hear an animal moving way off in the distance and tell you what it is without any hesitation. I want to preface this by saying I don't know what exactly this thing was, but the closest I could come up with must have been either a Wendigo or a Skinwalker. Alright, so the night of the encounter, me, my cousin, and my best friend all head into the woods. You know, dumb 16-year-old shit. We all had shotguns, as we like to raccoon hunt, or just shoot at random shit for fun. If you've ever been in a pine forest, you know that there's pretty much no lighting from the moon when it gets dark, so we brought headlamps to be able to see where we were going. Eventually, we come up on a high bank on a creek, probably about a 15-foot drop or so, I'd say. You could almost say we were on a peninsula. The water flowed around the spot we were at in a U-shape. We decided to sit down, turn off our headlamps, and look up at the trees to see if we could see any stars. After sitting silently in the dark for about 15 minutes, my friend goes to turn on his headlamp. My cousin grabs his arm and whispers to the both of us, "There's something about 20 yards to our right, and it's moving toward us." I've never been more terrified in my life as when I listened and heard heavy bipedal footsteps making its way to us steadily. This thing wasn't searching, it was beelining. At this point, we all just freeze in place and listen. It reaches the bank on the other side of the peninsula, and without skipping a beat, starts descending. We hear it enter the water, and eventually come to the other side of the creek, the side that we were on. It starts scaling the drop-off, effortlessly. This thing kept the same pace, whether it was level, descending, in the water, or climbing. It's now only about 30 feet or so away at this point. My cousin whispers, "On the count of 3, turn on our headlamps and shoot." The footsteps kept getting closer. They were heavy, heavier than any animal that would be in those woods. On the count of 3, we turn on our headlamps, and nothing. No sound of something scurrying away. No footsteps. Nothing. We hightailed it out, with one person guarding the rear. What do you guys think? I'm convinced I almost had a deadly encounter. Am I crazy?
I was on a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay with about 7 other men doing a shakedown test cruise. We planned to be out for about 12 hours. It was the mid-80s, not as reliable weather prediction resources. We got caught in a tropical storm, winds gusting into the 50-mile-per-hour range, just this short of a weak hurricane. We had just barely rigged storm hawsers and storm sails, because the one fellow on board who was the best sailor sensed the storm was almost on us. Otherwise, we would have died. During the storm itself, I expected to die at any time. In fact, we made a securite call on the radio. If you have time at sea, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's not that important. For what seemed like 15 minutes, we were in a maelstrom. No visibility, but then it passed, and we would live. This was at about 3 p.m., and although there was cloud cover, of course, the ambient light was such that you could see 2 miles in any direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you know that such storms, particularly in shallower depths near land masses, dredge a lot of things up from the seafloor. We're all on deck, working lines, checking damage, etc. And the bay around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the saying, "the sea is confused." I look about 15 feet off the starboard side, and something swims to the surface, breaks the surface, looks at us, and then submerges again. It was like a thin man with humanoid shape. Arms articulated like a man, a human head, but
Its skin was covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us, blinked its weird, heavy-lidded eyes, and then dove back under. So maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, no injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive, but my senses in that situation were sharpened, not dulled. I had, at that time, about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats, and had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, skates, etc., all around the world. I was not the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster. I made an instant decision that I was not going to say anything. What could I say? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it? The men on this boat were all mechanics and engineers and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake? At the time, it was important for each of us to get a D-skipper or OOD qualifications, and saying something like that would be frowned upon. And as I stood there in my life vest, soaking wet, hooking onto the steel lifeline, glad to be alive, one of the other sailors, a U.S. Navy captain with over 30 years experience in the surface Navy, piped up and said, "I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these big eyes, and then it went back under." "Yeah, I saw it too," I said. No one else said they had seen it. Then we sailed back to the pier later that day, and didn't speak of it again. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Me and my little sister, 2 years younger, shared a room, and we had a bunk bed. Me being the oldest, I had the top bunk. One night I woke up. It was dark, but the bed faced the window, so I could see the street lamps outside, giving the room some light. And I saw, sitting by my feet, staring at me, some black figure, almost childlike in appearance, but with glowing eyes. They were glowing black. It looked like it was made out of darkness. I don't know how to describe it. I was so confused and scared. Just a feeling of ice running through my spine. It tilted its head, and then smiled at me. And suddenly, my sister starts to scream her lungs out. With that thing sitting by the stairs in the bunk bed, I just jumped down from the top bunk. Fortunate for me, we had a lot of stuffed toys on the floor I landed on. I grabbed my sister, and we just bolted out of the room. Our parents just thought it was a nightmare, of course. I had trouble sleeping for weeks after that. I asked my sister about it like 10 years afterwards. Her response was that she had a nightmare where I got hurt by the Starless, and after that I started to hurt others. And she remembered it because I woke her up by picking her up and running out of the room. She was, of course, confused why I would do that, when normally when she had a nightmare, I would just lay down in the same bed as her, and we'd curl up together until she fell asleep again. She has no memory of her screaming, but I remember it as she was already sitting up in her bed when I landed on the floor. What the fuck was that thing? Do you guys have any theories? In July of 2016, some friends, we'll call them Cole, Cody, Nick, and Josh, and I were walking home from a party around 3 a.m. We were going to Cole's house since he was house sitting for his grandma. Her house is also haunted, but we'll save that for another post. Anyway, we were walking from this party, which was about half a mile from Cole's place, and the road we had to walk on gets crazy dark at night. Now, some details on this road. There aren't any lights, and it just has this overall creepy vibe to it. This neighborhood butts up against a swampy area, so I don't know if it has anything to do with it. My friends and I have done investigations on this road, and we noticed that the swampy side of the road is always darker than the other side, and it gets eerily quiet. We always feel like there's something right along the tree line watching us, even though we can't see it. Getting back to our experience, we were walking back to Cole's house from this party, and Cole noticed this green ball of light fall from the sky into the swampy side of the street. Cole described it as a beach ball that had this green neon light emanating from it. He thought maybe it was a shooting star, but it didn't have any fallout or anything. and it just glided into the trees without making a sound. The weird thing is, the rest of us didn't see it. We brushed it off and kept walking. A few minutes later, we all heard this sound in the trees on the swampy side of the road. It sounded like something was brushing toward us, almost like a stampede, but once it reached the tree line and the fence, it stopped. We stopped and looked at each other because at that point, we were all a little spooked and didn't know what to do. As we started walking again, I happened to look into the trees and I see this creature just standing there watching us. It looked like it was over 7 feet tall, lanky. It looked like it was covered in scales or some kind of rough skin and had these yellowish eyes. I screamed, which of course made the guys look over and they saw it too. The thing just kept staring at us and it was super unnerving. We took off and didn't stop until we got to Cole's house. We shut all the blinds and locked everything up and couldn't sleep the rest of the night. We still don't know what we saw and we never saw it again after that. We tried chalking it up to us being slightly intoxicated and imagining things, because we did drink that night, but we only had a couple beers each. Plus, there's no way all 5 of us could have hallucinated the same thing. We're also pretty sure that homeless people live on the swampy side of the road, so maybe it was one of them messing with us. We all named the creature Lizard Man. We never walk down that road anymore, even if we're at Cole's house. We always make sure to drive now. My girlfriend and I were on our way to work this morning between 4:30 and 5. We were driving along and talking as we usually do when I got this weird feeling to look out the window. I was facing forward and looking at the signs of the roads for animals, and as I look out the window, I see a looming black figure that was incredibly large. There wasn't much light on it, but I saw no details as it was blacker and seemed to reflect no light than anything that I'd ever seen, even though the grass around it was slightly illuminated. It was like an ill-shaped moose, but in size only. It was also hard to tell if it was on all fours or hunched over. I didn't see any antlers. My girlfriend was driving, and she asked, "Was that an animal back there?" I didn't see it ahead of us. I answered, "Yeah, it must have been." I didn't see it either until it was beside us. We both were suddenly overcome with fear, and the car was filled with a very strong smell of blood. It was incredibly strong, and we both immediately commented on it, and were almost overwhelmed. We have never before or since smelled that in our car, nor have we at any other place. We drove back past on our way home, and again, no smell of blood. I felt her pick up the pace, even though we had already passed it by a bit. She was driving around 75 kilometers an hour, and sped up to about 80 or 85. The smell eventually dissipated, and we were kind of left scratching our heads and feeling kind of excited, but on edge. We live in a rural town in western Sweden, about 30 kilometers east of Gothenburg. I'm quite into this sub, and I can't think of anywhere else to post, because Google has given me nothing with specific keywords. Does anyone have any clue what it might have been? As it was definitely not an animal native to this part of Sweden, and it seemed much bigger than a moose. I've seen other weird stuff in Sweden and Australia, but nothing that resembles this. Any help is appreciated. So I'm very new to this. A friend of mine recently introduced me to the very concept of wendigos after I told her about something that had happened to me and 2 of my siblings. To start, I'm a 21-year-old female. I'm home for the holidays, from school. I typically go for a stroll around our family property every day. About 2 months ago, while all of my family was out of the house, I distinctly heard my name being called by my youngest sister. I looked up and around, but didn't see anything. And then I heard it again. It was her voice, but she wasn't home.
It freaked me out, so I went inside. I told my brother, who's 15, about it when they got back, and he freaked out and told me that something similar had happened to him while I was at school. He was walking outside also, moving some stuff into the shed at night, when he heard me calling his name. I was off at university at the time, and all of my family was retired to bed by that time. He said he heard me calling his name 3 times, and he ran inside and woke everyone up, but they didn't find anyone on the property. He also told me that a few weeks after it happened, my youngest sister, who's 6, heard something similar. She heard my brother calling her name from inside the house, but he was napping on the couch of the room that she was playing in. She heard it from downstairs, and they were upstairs. It scared her so bad that she woke him up. They looked around, but they didn't find anyone. All of this to say that I told these stories to a friend, and that they mentioned Wendigos. Any ideas? So I don't know what made me think of this today, but many years ago, my family was driving home from a shopping trip. Just for fun, my dad decided to take one of the scenic routes that ran through the mountains north of Park City, Utah. It was one of those dirt roads on which you could only drive like 20 miles an hour, so it took forever, and I remember being aggravated that we couldn't just take the highway. Well, I ended up noticing this weird heap off the side of the road, kind of hidden amongst the trees. I made my dad reverse the car, and that's when we realized it was some kind of animal. It was lying on its side, as if asleep, and wore one of those cattle tracking collars around its neck. But we could tell that it wasn't a cow of any sort. And because it was facing away from us, we couldn't get a good look at its face. But it was about the size of a bear, and had thick brown fur. The skull didn't really look like a bear's though. The closest thing I can compare it to is the heads of the creatures from where the wild things are. It was curled up in a ball, the way people sometimes do when they're sleeping and trying to get warm, and we could see the soles of its feet. This is the really creepy part, because if it wasn't for the feet, we probably just would have assumed it was a bear. But these weren't paws. They were more human-like, much paler than the fur, and totally creepy. I could basically make out distinctive human toes, only these were much larger than the average person's. The way it was curled up, and the way that the head and feet looked, led us to believe that this wasn't some ordinary animal. Obviously, with it lying down, I couldn't tell for sure, but it didn't look to be that much taller than a person. It was just so round. I think that's one of the things that struck me most. The thing's body was almost comically spherical. Needless to say, none of us dared to get out of the car to investigate further. And after a moment of kind of looking at each other and going, "What the hell?" we decided to just move on. Keep in mind, this took place circa 2006 or 2007, so smartphones weren't as commonplace as they are now, and none of us had a good camera to snap a photo. Looking back, I really wish we did, because then maybe we could have uploaded it to the internet and gotten some answers. I don't know. What do you guys think? This happened yesterday, August 12, 2020, and I scribbled down as many details as I could on a scrap piece of paper in my car. I wanted to try to get my story down while it was still all fresh in my mind. Yesterday, I took a drive up through Wyoming and then took Mirror Lake Scenic Byway back down into Utah. My grandma passed away last week, and I needed some time to go clear my head, which I often do with a drive. Mirror Lake Highway is beautiful,
And being a Wednesday, it wasn't crowded at all, so I could take my time and enjoy it. One of the pull-offs on the road is the Slate Gorge Overlook. There's a short trail that leads to the overlook, and you can then look down into the gorge. It's not super big, and see the Provo River. No one was there, so I took a seat and let my mind wander a bit. You can sort of get an idea of what it looks like from this picture. I'd been there probably 20 minutes or so when I saw something come out from behind the trees. I was excited, thinking maybe it was a moose or elk, and I always like seeing those. But what appeared was what looked like a hunched over person that was sort of half walking, half crawling, rather slowly. While that in itself was weird, it was even stranger that it looked like the person was wearing a really heavy, crudely fashioned, gray fur coat with a hood, but one that was several sizes too small for them. It almost looked a part of them, like they had fur themselves, but that didn't really make any sense to me. It was also around 80 degrees out, with temps clipping 100 in the valley, so it wasn't cold by any means. While the sides are kind of steep, you can get down into the gorge without too much of an issue. I kind of thought maybe it was someone doing a TikTok video or something like that, but I didn't see anyone else around to be filming. Eventually, whatever it was made its way to the water, and it stuck its head in for a drink. As it looked like it was finished, a group of people were coming up the overlook, and they had kids with them who were making a bunch of noise. It can echo through the gorge a bit, and the creature/person heard it and took off incredibly fast on all fours over pretty uneven ground. Now, I'm not sure what I saw. In all likelihood, it could have been a person getting in touch with nature and wearing some homemade costume, but the way they moved seemed unnaturally human, especially when the noise spooked it and it took off running. I'm sort of conflicted between a person in a fursuit and an actual cryptid. Both seem plausible, and I don't really want to immediately jump to conclusion on what it could be. I've always been into Bigfoot, and it didn't remind me of anything Bigfoot related that I'd seen, so I pretty much ruled that out. But otherwise, I really don't know. I wish I would have thought to bring my phone with me so I could have snapped a photo, but I left it in my center console since I didn't want it going off and spoiling the quiet time. Any thoughts? I really don't know much about Utah cryptids other than Bigfoot and supposedly a pterodactyl that flies around there.